This is the show your pastor warned you about.
Hello, my friends. Greg Koukl on Stand to Reason, and welcome to the show. I always say I'm glad you've joined me, but I always am glad that you have joined me. And looking forward to chatting with you here over the next couple of hours. Make that 3 hours for the full show of what I hope will be clear thinking Christianity. I committed a personally unpardonable sin here. I have left my cell phone at home. Did you ever do that? My first impulse was to call my wife to let her know I'd be out of touch for that day. And I thought, I can't do that. I don't have my phone. I better call the office and let them know. Oh, wait, I can't do that. Oh, man. Okay, I'll just listen to MP3s. I can't do that. I felt three things I felt. I felt naked. Like, where's my phone? Where's my pants? You know, one of those kinds of things. I felt impotent, powerless. How am I going to check the traffic report? I don't remember the radio station that gives the traffic report. I haven't used it in 10 years. I couldn't call home. I couldn't call the office. And I was just like, I'm just driving. That's it, you know. This I noticed on my hour-and-a-half commute into the office this morning. Of course, all day long I've been bereft of my phone and surviving so far. But I not only did I feel naked and impotent, I also felt bored. Because like I said, I had nothing to do. But I couldn't call my brother Dave to keep me occupied during my commute, you know, that kind of deal. Anyway, how did we ever survive without cell phones? That's the way it feels. You get so dependent on these things, and for good reason. They serve a very good purpose. In any event, I have just recently, as of last night, returned from Vail, Colorado. I have never been there before. Been to Denver and Colorado Springs and Boulder. Actually, the Springs a great number of times, working with Summit Ministries there, and down by Durango once. Colorado's a beautiful state, but I'd never been to Vail, which is about 2 hours west of Denver. They had invited me to be part of their annual conference, and this time held there in Vail. And it's kind of like being on a cruise because you're all in the same hotel and you're all sharing breakfast and dinner, and you have free time, and there are also conference times of training and speaking and the like, and that was my role. Actually, I didn't do too much. I gave an address and then participated in a broadcast of the White Horse Inn live before the audience. So that was kind of like a talk of sorts, but those of you who follow the White Horse Inn will be able to catch that sometime in the future. I can't remember the exact topic we covered, but you can look forward to that if you like. But suffice to say that the demand on me was rather modest in terms of my presentations. I was there for all of the events and also mingling with the group and talking with people and sharing meals with people, and that's a big part of the attraction of this kind of thing. So I was engaged for much of the time, but I wasn't speaking that much. But it was great to get to spend time with, say, Mike, who I've known for many years, and his family. He's got young kids this similar age as mine, and I was able to bring my wife and my girls and spend those 5 days up there. We got there Wednesday night and left Monday morning. So, and the event ended on Saturday, so I had all Saturday afternoon in addition to the other afternoons, because it was morning and evening, and the afternoons are free, and all day Sunday to just, kibitz and swim with my girls in the pool and hike around, and it was a fabulous time, though. If I had never been to Vail before, I knew it by reputation only. It's a small little village, or actually a collection of villages there along the road at the base of that mountain, and they're like Tyrolean malls. There's all kinds of shops and restaurants, but they do have this quaint mountain feel to them, and flowers are everywhere in town, and so there's a river that runs right. The river runs through it, and so it's really a great place to hang out if you don't have to buy anything like food. Most of that was covered for us, but it's very expensive to do anything. But unless you just hike, which is what I did. There was one hike that I did on my first afternoon off, where I went from Vail Village, which is the bottom of the gondola, up to the top of the gondola. Now the gondola costs $28 if you want to ride it up, but it's free coming down. Fortunately for me, I thought, well, I'd beat this rap and I'd hike up, and then take the gondola down, the freebie ride. But it cost me, because that hike was on a trail called Berry Picker, which should have been called Butt Kicker, as one person put it, because it was a tough hike. I did not realize the vertical ascent was almost a half a mile in about 4 miles of trail length. So you figure a half a mile over 4 miles. What is that? A 20% grade? Oh, that's pretty steep. And I just kept banging away at it by myself. Actually, I started out with Eva, my 6-year-old, because a whole bunch of families were heading up to take the trail on and taking their kids with them, as if it was a Sunday stroll in the park. My daughter got about 75 and a half yards into this hike. And thankfully, as it turned out, she said, "That's it, Papa. I'm done for the day. I want to go back to the hotel and go swimming." Actually, I took her back and she took a nap. And I was a little bit frustrated at first, because I thought I wanted to enjoy this with my 6-year-old, until I got on the trail and I realized how grueling it was. And I feel lucky that I made it 2 hours and 23 minutes later when I arrived at the top. And it was really, really hard. So I'm glad she pooped out then, rather than 15 or 20 minutes into it, because I could just shuffle her back to the hotel and then get on and get going myself and finish up and do this on my own. It was a fun hike. And the next day, 2 days later, I got to take the gondola to the top and then do some hiking up the higher elevation that wasn't so grueling, actually. But by the time you get to the top, you start out at 8,500 feet. And you top out a little over 10,000 when you get to the top of the gondola. That's thin air for us flatlanders. So it was quite a workout. I was real proud of myself, satisfied, and I think in a good sense, that I made it to the top. Many of the others had to turn around and come back because their kids couldn't make it, but even young teenagers made it. And many of the other adults did as well. So, when I was on top, and this was true all over. I mentioned the flowers in town, and you see them on the slopes. But when I got up above 10,000 feet, the slopes up there were just carpeted with flowers, largely lupins, purple and violet and blue, and daisies, yellow and white, and a bunch of other flowers. I didn't know what they were, but they were magnificent. It was almost breathtaking. And even though there were a lot of people around, you're not far away from civilization. You're up in the mountains, but if something happened, you could get help quickly. It seemed like there was a lot of solitude while I was hiking on these trails across the slopes. There what normally would be ski areas. So you have this broad expanses and beautiful carpeting of flowers that just took my breath away. In fact, coming down on the gondola, I happened to mention this, and this is something I've been toying with lately, doing things more like this. And I don't know, you could think about it for yourself. But the thing I'm toying with is introducing God talk or God language or God reflections into ordinary conversation just in passing, much like you do with your Christian friends, but instead of doing it with Christian friends, doing it with non-Christian friends and see if it gets a rise out of them, maybe in a good way. I don't know, get things started. You never know what's going to happen when you step into that arena. So I'm coming down the mountain, and there's a woman who's used to live in San Diego, now lives in the mountains there somewhere, and her 12-year-old daughter, and we're riding down the gondola. It's just the three of us in this big gondola looking at the beautiful world. And I'm talking a little bit about having just hiked up high and seeing these magnificent flowers and the beautiful scene. And I just was looking out. And this was calculated because I wanted to see what would happen. I'm testing this theory out. But it was a genuine comment. And I, looking around, I said, boy, everywhere you look, you see the glory of the Lord. That was it. Now, maybe you thought I took a chance by mentioning that. Maybe people feel a little uncomfortable. I don't actually know what is discomforting inherently in such a comment, but it is making a presumption, isn't it? It's a statement that presumes the reality of God and that he's responsible. And is that not appropriate to make that kind of observation? Sure it is, but most of you wouldn't do that in non-Christian company or company that you're not sure about their convictions, or maybe you wouldn't do it even in mixed company where you got some Christians and some non-Christians. I know that many Christians have just shut up and let the non-Christians govern the nature of the conversation, but why not just step out and talk normally and naturally like that about that? And so I did. And I was greeted with dead silence almost the whole way down after I made that remark. Now, I wasn't looking at them like I was trying to grandstand at all. I just made the observation and was curious at what the response would be. Now, that time, there was silence. There are two other times in those 2 days that I made a comment just like that. One was with the driver who took us to the airport on Monday, and again, silence. But another time, there was a young man who was a hiking instructor, that 21-year-old fella who was doing summer work up there, I guess, and we were chatting just about the trails, and I mentioned about the flowers, and he marveled as well, and I said the same thing to him, that everywhere you look, you see the glory of the Lord. And he did give a positive response. He didn't identify himself as a Christian or didn't necessarily acknowledge what the truthfulness of the remark, but he did just say, yeah, kind of like that. Maybe being polite, whatever. But just a shot, you never know. Is that a stone in someone's shoe? Maybe. I just took a shot at it just to see. But there's nothing wrong with giving honor to God when honor is his due about something, and that was the case here. So, and it was just a matter of fact, and I moved on to the next thing. I wasn't pressing the point, but I don't know, I'm going to try to do more of that in the future. And that is be more public about my comfort with speaking about spiritual things. And so the kinds of things that you might say easily with Christian friends, maybe you might say with non-Christian friends as well. And I think the value of this is to get people to help people realize that there are others who are very comfortable being public about their spiritual convictions and talking about them as if they're real and sound and legitimate and valid. It's just a matter-of-fact characterization. When we were coming back yesterday, we flew into Denver with the short hop, the puddle jumper, and we're waiting for our flight to LAX. And a tornado came through the airport, a twister. You could see it through the windows. It's one of those things where they made the announcement, tornado has been sighted. Please, everybody go to the storm shelter, that kind of thing. This is Denver Airport. Huge. Please do not go near the windows. Of course, what did everybody, including yours truly, do? Head for the windows. I wanted to see the twister. I knew it wasn't close enough to be a problem. They always give you an alert early on those kinds of things, but I could see the twister out there on the tundra, the prairie, actually. And then we made it down into the bowels of the Denver airport for about a half an hour until the storm passed, which it did without incident. But while down there, my daughters, particularly one, were a bit frightened. To me, it's adventure. I knew we were going to be safe, no problem really. We were down in the bowels of the earth, and no tornado was going to hurt us. But they were a little concerned, and so I gathered my girls together, and the four of us, me, my wife, and my two girls, we just put our heads together, and I said a prayer for us, expressing our trust in God. And so there was another incident. I didn't make a big display of it, but I wanted to live out my convictions in my everyday life, even though I was standing there in public. Now, I'm not saying this to grandstand or to be a spiritual show-off. That's not my intention at all. I'm trying to convey the conviction that as followers of Christ, we should be setting the pace, in a sense, for PDAs, public displays of affection, spiritually speaking. There are times when I will curtail my comments or attitudes if I think there's an especially sensitive circumstance, and I'll unnecessarily bring discomfort to people in a way that's problematic. But I think sometimes we go overboard in trying to protect people from that, and we have a naked public square then. Then in terms of our public interactions with people, it's like the spiritual life doesn't exist. And so I want to try to live out my spiritual life a little more regularly and consistently in public so people can see it. Look at the Muslims who wear burqas. They're doing that, right? The Amish who wear their clothing, they are making a statement to the world that they stand for something. Why can't we do that in kind of modest ways as well? And so my statement about the earth being filled with the glory of the Lord is an example of that, or praying briefly in public. And had if somebody had come up to me and said something, I'd have been glad to talk to them about it, but I just wanted to make that appropriate display of religious conviction. It was right to pray. It's right to ask God to help. It's right to express our trust in God, and it's right for me to do that before my children, so they see what Papa's response is in that. But it's also right, I think, for us to do that before the public. And a few months back, I talked about, maybe it was even last year now, I lose track of time, but I talked about public prayer at a restaurant, bowing your head and giving thanks, and why that's important, being public about it, and the salutary effect that this can have on other people. And I talked about some of the instances of that. But I guess this is just an encouragement to wear your religion on your sleeve a little bit more. I don't mean disingenuously. I don't mean in the sense that you're trying to show off or grandstand at all, but to be authentic and upfront about these things, and not hide your religious expression because the marketplace is secular. It doesn't have to be secular. If it's secular, it's naked, right? The naked public square. Let's bring a little bit of our spiritual conviction visibly into that public square, and who knows what God will do with that. It certainly is legitimate always to glorify God and give Him honor as in circumstances like that. And don't worry so much about what people are going to think. All right, let's see. We've got a few callers here, so I'll get to your calls in just a moment after this break. I'm Greg Koukl, and you're listening to Stand to Reason.
At Stand to Reason, we depend on the support of donors to carry on our mission to equip Christian ambassadors, and your non-cash donation items can help. You can transform your old cars, cell phones, or other items into ministry impact by donating them to Stand to Reason. Think of it. Because of your donation, Christians just like you will be able to effectively share their faith and change the lives of others forever. To make non-cash donations of all kinds to Stand to Reason, call iDonate at 877-897-4273 or go to idonate.com and visit STR's page. They'll take care of everything for you and Stand to Reason. Just call them at 877-897-4273 or visit idonate.com. Thank you very much for making Stand to Reason's work possible.
Greg Koukl back at you here on Stand to Reason. And by the way, I encourage you to go to our new Facebook page. It's not the group anymore, it's the page. And for the last years since we first started Facebook, it's always been a group. Now we've shifted to a page, and this is the kind that you have to give us the like, the thumbs up, and I want to encourage you to go there and like us. because using the page is going to be able allow us to serve your needs better and put our information out there in a little more effective fashion. Not I don't run all of that stuff, so I can't give you the skinny. But we made the shift because we thought it would be better, and that means the old group is going to be shut down eventually. We want you to be in touch with us and follow the same information, just a different Facebook format. That's the page. So go there and give us a like. All right. Let's see what you folks have to say today. Let's talk with Terrell in Oklahoma. Hi, Terrell.
Hi, Greg. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. We've met before, haven't we?
Yes, sir, we have. The Credo House here in Oklahoma City, the Edmond area.
Goodness. Yes. I had such a great time when I was there.
We loved having you here, and my wife and I got to come out to L.A. and attend the dinner. I guess it was a year and a half ago.
That's right. Yeah, time flies. It seems like it was more recent than that, but good to talk to you, and I'm going to be out in your neck of the woods here in a couple of weeks, I think.
That's actually, you're going to be here on Friday and Saturday.
I guess it's not a couple of weeks. Yeah, a couple of days. I should have said that.
We're looking forward to giving you some good old Oklahoma hospitality.
All right, good. Thanks, Terrell. What's on your mind today?
Well, number one, want to plug STR. Just want to encourage everyone to become strategic partners. We've really appreciated the ministry of STR for quite a while, and just thank everyone for who's behind the scenes as well as folks who are behind the microphone. So,
we have a fabulous team here and a very deep bench, and they're all working really hard to help you guys out. So thank you for those thoughts.
So thanks to everybody. So let me get to my question here. There's a lot of current sympathy for, I think, in certain circles, like, for example, Rob Bell's Love Wins, about what I think appears to be an overemphasis on the love of God, sometimes even excluding or even de-emphasizing the other attributes of God, like His holiness, righteousness, and justice. My basic question is, how does God view unbelievers currently? I know He pours out His love,
right.
He pours out His mercy. So are they objects of His love, grace, and mercy? Does He view them as children of wrath, children of disobedience, all of the above?
Well,
we know what He did for them.
Yeah, the wording you just chose to use is biblical wording, and it describes the non-believer. In fact, I think you just cited from Ephesians 2, which I've been anticipating your call. I've been digging through passages, finding different things. And I had forgotten about Ephesians 2, but that's another one that makes it very clear. Here's the simplest passage on this one. It's the absolutely simplest because of its central. The centrality of the or I should say, let me back up and put it this way. This is the principal statement of the nature of the gospel in the New Testament. It's the book of Romans, and Romans starts out in addressing this issue directly, and I think purposefully. Notice in Romans chapter 1, verse 16, Paul says, "I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It's the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also the Greek. For in it, that is the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it's written, but the righteous man shall live by faith." Now, the reason I started there is because, though normally I would have started your answer in verse 18, which I'll read in a moment, what struck me here, since I've got a section divider in my Bible, which doesn't exist in the original, obviously, that separates off verse 17 verses from the next verse 18 and following, it creates an artificial break in thinking. Now, I do think that there is a break there of sorts, although it might be that the break should be between 15 and 16 rather than 17 and 18, because what Paul does here is says, "I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it's the power of God. The just shall live by faith," and that's his summary account of everything that follows in the next couple chapters. And he then lays out what that gospel is. And here is how he starts what the gospel is. For the next verse now, verse 18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. Simply put, Paul says the gospel is what saves people because it is through it the righteousness of God is revealed. Now let me lay it out. The first thing that is revealed in the righteousness of God regarding the gospel is that the wrath of God is being revealed. He starts out with the bad news. The wrath of God is over the community of human beings in rebellion against God. This is a universal statement that he's making here, and he goes on to speak universally about the fallenness of man there in the first couple of chapters and into chapter 3. So Paul is laying out the gospel of the good news of rescue by laying a backdrop of the terrible circumstances that human beings now, apart from God, find themselves in. They are not under the grace of God. They are not under the affection of God. The love of God is manifest in the offer of mercy that we see in the gospel, but the disposition of God towards the unbeliever is a disposition of wrath. And this can be seen in quite a number of passages. I mentioned the Romans passage. How about Jesus in John 3? He does talk about God loving the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, verse 16. And then he says, God did not send the Son into the world, and I'm going to put in parentheses here because I think this is intended. This time. God did not send the Son into the world this time, or the first time, to judge the world, but that the world might be saved through him. But look at what he says next in verse 18 of John 3. He who believes in him is not judged, but he who does not believe has been judged already. It's a fait accompli. It's over with for all intents and purposes if you don't believe in Jesus, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. This is the judgment, verse 19. This is all connected. That the light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than the light, for their deeds were evil. And so we and they don't want to come to the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. That's in verse 20. And so later on in the chapter, he who believes in the Son has eternal life, but he who does not obey the Son, and I take that obey the Son in the area of belief in him, will not see life, but the wrath of God. Now here's an interesting tense. It doesn't say will fall upon him as in some future state. It says, but the wrath of God abides on him, or remains on him. So my sense here, Terrell, is that the wrath of God is the condition that human beings are under at the moment apart from Christ, because they are at the moment rebels against God. Now, this does not mean that God has no tenderness towards the fallen. He does, as evidenced by the fact that he reaches out to them in mercy. But he is reaching out to them as to one lost, one perishing, one under God's anger. I'm thinking, how does the Ephesians 2 put it here? You were dead in your trespasses and sins, in which you formerly walked, according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, and the spirit now working in the sons of disobedience. I mean, that just those first two verses of chapter 2, people that don't know Christ, that are unregenerate, are not connected to God. They're connected to the devil. They're following him. They're living according to his way. Among them, we too all formerly lived in the lust of the flesh, indulging the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature children of wrath. This Paul says all before he came to mercy in Christ. So though there is a generosity by God and a love that offers mercy, though it is true that even while we were yet sinners in rebellion against God, Christ died for us. God took the first step. That's Romans 5. All that being true, still the standard position of the non-believer before God is a position of wrath, and wrath hangs over them until they come under the protection of the cross. And this strikes me as the consistent teaching of Scripture. And in fact, in the book of Acts, where the gospel is preached 13 times to either individuals or to groups, the love of God is not mentioned a single time.
Yeah.
So that ought to give you a sense of what the biblical balance is with regards to the good news. The good news is only good by contrast to the bad news. And insulin is only good news if diabetes is bad and you have diabetes. Now you need the insulin. Insulin isn't good news to me. I don't care about it. I don't have diabetes. But for the one who has it, boy, insulin's good news. And by the same token, the gospel is good news because it's an antidote to a terrible circumstance, and that is the wrath of God, which everybody has hanging over them until Jesus.
Well, I appreciate your comments there. We're dealing with some issues with some family members, and I think they're overemphasizing the mercy and the love of God, not to the exclusion of justice, but it's kind of way over on one side. And those scriptures, I've actually kind of looked up several of those, and I think that's going to be that presentation. But I am going to start off with Romans 1 to help them out.
Well, you suggested Ephesians 2. There's a lot there, I think, that will help you out. That is to provide the biblical balance and the order. Both things are true, wrath and love. But I think I was stunned when I went through the book of Acts to find out for myself the way the message was communicated, to find out that the word love never even occurs in the entire book. It was not the appeal that was made. There was a completely different appeal that was offered to those to whom the gospel was being communicated. And just as an example here, and this is what I think you can go to your friends, because the book of Acts are the people who Jesus trained to follow after him, sharing their convictions with others. So we know what they said. And look at Acts chapter 10, where Peter goes to Cornelius, who was a pretty decent guy by most standards, even as the text identifies it. He talks about a man who fears the Lord and who gave alms and whatever, and he was doing the best he could with the information he had. And here's what Peter says in verse 42, that Jesus, he starts out early saying that he is a witness of the things about Jesus of Nazareth. Then he testifies to Jesus and who he was and what he did. And then he rose from the dead and appeared to Peter and the other apostles, and then said, verse 42, he ordered us to preach to the people and solemnly to testify that this is the one who has been appointed by God as judge of the living and the dead. And of him all the prophets bear witness that through his name everyone who believes in him receives forgiveness of sin. So there you have, he sums it up. Jesus is the one who's going to rescue, he's going to judge. That's the wrath of God. And he's also going to be the rescuer of those who put faith in him. And it doesn't say, he's got a wonderful plan for your life and he loves you. And I'm not disparaging that approach completely, right. But if there's any imbalance, it's in that direction. We have left out the judgment part, and not that we always have to be banging our Bibles and breathing fire, but we have to be clear with people that they are in jeopardy and they are at risk, and they are at risk for the evil they've done, and they know it if they were honest with themselves. And I think that is there's a reason why God put that first in the Bible, why the disciples communicated it that way consistently. I think it's the right way to communicate it. So there you go.
Okay. Hey, Greg, thank you very much. Appreciate your comments and look forward to seeing you this weekend.
I will see you this weekend, Terrell. All right.
Okay.
Take care.
Yep.
All
okay,
right.
God bless.
Thank you. Bye, buddy. All right, that's let's see. On Saturday, I'm going to be in Tulsa, and you can go on our website at str.org and get all the details there. But if you can't attend, there is a live stream of my teaching for that day, and it's going to be the place to locate it is solacechurch.com. That's SOLACE. CHURCH, solacechurch.com, and you can get the information for the live stream of my Saturday event in Tulsa, Oklahoma. All right, time for a break. More calls in just a moment on Stand to Reason.
You can find STR on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, and Pinterest. Interact with STR staff, post comments, get involved with other like-minded Christians. Want to know what is going on with STR? Speaking events, new podcasts, resources, and articles? Follow STR online. You can find all of our social media connections at str.org.
Don't forget, Rethink Apologetics Youth Conference is coming back to Orange County September 26th and 27th. And you can go to rethinkapologetics.com to sign up. This is going to be a fabulous event, just like it's been the last 2 years, and it's growing every single year. Our broad list of speakers, Greg Koukl, Alan Schleman, I'll be there, Sean McDowell, Tim Barnett. I mean, we've got a great lineup. It's the kind of thing that the last few years people just were raving about. So if you're a young person, or if you're an old fogey with a young person, or if you're a youth leader with a group, think about participating. We had whole youth groups represented last year, and it really made a big difference when everybody's on board together talking about the same exciting thing at your next youth group meeting after a Rethink conference. Once again, September 26th and 27th, Orange County, California, Crossline Church. All the details there at rethinkapologetics.com. And if you register by August 15th, you can get the early bird registration of $29. After that, it jumps in $10 increments, $39 pre-conference reservation, $49 at the door. So register early, you can make big savings. Let's see, Vancouver, Washington. Cornell, welcome to the show.
Hi, Greg. It's good to talk to you.
Thank you. Nice to talk to you, too. I'm trying to remember when the last time I was in Vancouver. I think it was like 2 years ago when there was a big... Because Vancouver is just actually north of the Oregon border, right? Right over the river.
Yes. Yeah. It's overshadowed by Portland, Oregon. And every time I tell people I'm from Vancouver or this area, they're like, oh, Vancouver, Canada?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But there was a huge Russian church that we participated with. I did some event there. I don't know. Are you part of that group?
No, I'm actually Romanian. I'm part of a Romanian church.
Oh, okay. Well, good.
Yeah,
Glad to have you. Pace Domnului.
Oh, Pace Domnului, Pace Domnului. That was good.
Bad accent, but you got the idea.
Yeah, I got it, yeah.
Good for you. Thank you. So what's on your mind today, Cornell?
So my question comes from a conversation I had with my boss. And he hasn't really made a statement, but I'm pretty sure he's either agnostic or atheist. He was saying that something without a beginning cannot be defined. And instead of saying, oh well, of course, I've never heard anyone say that. So I said, well, I'll think about that.
Good for you.
And yeah, well, I've read your book, Tactics. So
that's how to get out of the hot seat. You let them say their view, and you say, I want to think about that, and that gives you some breathing room, right?
Absolutely, and it's been so helpful to me. But basically, the question is where did God come from? And I said, the nature of God is, he has no beginning. And he's like, that's not good enough for me. So I told him, well, let me think of a better answer. And I kind of formulated my own answer. And I want you to kind of see what your view,
Okay.
or well, not what your view, but what you think of my answer to him, if it's good or not. So I
Okay.
basically said that, yeah. So I basically said that, God created everything, including time. So the way I see it is God is outside of time. He's timeless. He's not affected by time. He doesn't sit wherever he is. He doesn't sit there looking at a clock, being affected by time. So, he doesn't have a beginning or end point. So therefore, God does not have a time. And he said, well, who created God? Well, if you say who created God, then you would have to ask who created his creator. And then you go into this never-ending chain
Right.
of who created who, and that seems to be kind of illogical to me too. So when I told him this, my boss said, oh, well, you cannot define something that has no beginning, or that has no beginning. So I want to see what you would have to say.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot here. There's a very simple response, I think, to his final challenge to you. But he is talking about something that is eternal and saying that if it's eternal, it can't be defined. But eternity itself has no beginning and has no end. Yet he knows what he means by eternity, something with no beginning and no end.
Okay.
So if the word eternity is meaningful, if the word eternity itself is meaningful, then that becomes a counterexample to his point. If you can't define, you can't define something, or something without a beginning can't be defined. But of course, eternity itself, we have a definition for eternity. We know what that is. He knows what it is.
Right.
And it has no beginning and it has no end. That's double trouble. So So his rejoinder is, I mean, my first response is to put the burden of proof back on him. If you want to go back to the tactical approach, if he says something with no beginning can't be defined, I would say, why would you say that? Because that is not obvious to me at all, that something with no beginning can't be defined. How about if we say this? God is an eternal, perfect being. He had no beginning, he had no end, but he is the ground of existence. Now, that is a perfectly clear, legitimate definition. Whether God like that exists or not is a different question. But as to being able to clearly identify and define a being that has no beginning, there it is. What's wrong with that definition? And for him to say, that's not good enough for me, is not going to wash. Because if he says that's not good enough for me, then I'm going to ask him, what do you mean by that? It's not good enough for what? You said something without a beginning can't be defined, and I just defined it. So if you say that's not good enough, you're going to have to tell me how I failed to meet your requirement. Okay? So does that make sense, or maybe I'm moving a little bit too fast here? But
no, that's making sense, because the way I didn't say anything to him, but the way I was thinking it is, he was saying you. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but he was saying you can't define it, and by giving like it a characteristic, you're kind of trying to define it as undefinable, and it's like kind of trying to define it yourself. But you're saying, I don't know. I didn't really know what to say.
Well, no, that's all right.
It's
It's not a bad thing that you just told him you're going to think about it, because if you don't have a rejoinder or a response at the moment, the best thing to do is be clear on their point, and then when the pressure's off, on your own time, then you can give it some thought. You and I can talk about it here. Chances are I wouldn't have been able to answer that moment at all of these things, but oftentimes when people are dismissive of something, when they say, well, that's not good enough for me, or something without a beginning can't be defined, well, I'm going to want to get some more information. If it's not good enough, then you need to tell me what's wrong with it. You can't just say it's not good enough. What's wrong with it? If it can't be defined, why would you say it can't be defined? And then what I did in that situation is I just thought of an obvious counterexample, and that's eternity. Well, eternity is defined, and eternity is without beginning or end. without limitation, so it just seems to
Right.
be false, the statement. Now, he may have objections of a different kind, fair enough, but these are the kinds of things people will throw out, and they haven't
Mhm.
thought about them. They sound compelling, but they haven't, they're not very substantive. And by asking them to defend their notion, like when he says that's not good enough for me, okay, then why isn't it good enough? Or that can't be defined. Why can't something without a beginning be defined? You
Right.
throw the ball back in their court, and now they have to make sense of their challenge. And this is when they start stumbling around because they haven't thought of it much. Frankly, I think if he would have thought of it very much, he wouldn't have made that statement, because the
R-
statement's obviously false on its face.
Right. So you think what I said about God's, where did God come from? You think that was a good answer? What I told him?
Yeah, I think it is accurate for you to say that, or one way or another, since God is eternal, that means he's uncreated. To say where did God come from is to ask the wrong kind of question about God. You
Yeah.
don't ask what created a non-created being. All right, that's the wrong
Right.
question. It's nonsense. That's like saying what came before the beginning. Well, the beginning
Right.
is the starting point. There is nothing before, by definition. This is called a category error, by the way, just FYI,
Okay.
as a informal fallacy. That's like saying, how much does the color yellow weigh? And you say, well, yellow's not the kind of thing that weighs anything. And by the same token, when you ask about God and you say, he says, who created God? You say, well, God was not created. That's a perfectly legitimate point of view. There's nothing
Mhm.
wrong with the point of view. Now, whether it's true or not is a different matter, but there's nothing illogical about it. He's asking like it's illogical, and what you did is you gave a response to point out that the person who would be illogical would be him, because
Right.
as you pointed out, the creator would need a creator, would need a creator, and you're into an infinite regress. That is a
Yeah.
vicious regress. So that was excellent. All of that was excellent.
Thank you. That means a lot. Yeah.
Well,
Because
good. No,
actually,
you're on the
so,
right line there.
thank you.
I will say this. Now, there are different points of view about the God and time question. And I
Right.
am not somebody who believes that God is outside of time. But
Okay.
this does not create a limitation for God. I think
Mhm.
that this allows God to do things. Things happen if God is inside of time, and if he's outside of time, then things don't happen. This is a more complex discussion. We don't need to get into
Right.
it now, but I don't think
Right.
you need to you don't need to necessarily argue that God is outside of time in order to argue that God is infinite. That is
Right.
temporally infinite, that he had no beginning. Whether or not God was inside or outside of time is a question that the Bible does not answer. It answers the question about God's infinity. He had no beginning and he had no end. But that does not answer the question about whether God is participating temporally or not. That's a different issue. So orthodoxy required he had no beginning and has no end. That was the point you argued, and you argued based on in part, logically, based on the problem of infinite regress. There's got to be a starting point. There's got to be something that is the ground, is uncreated, and in fact is the ground of existence, and that's what we hold the God of the Bible to be, and that's a perfectly legitimate answer. There's nothing incoherent about it, and there's nothing illogical about it. In fact, your friend was stuck with the logical problem of infinite regress. Now,
Right. Well,
as a
he wasn't
second,
aware of it.
pardon me?
He wasn't aware that he was stuck. He's like, "Oh, I stopped you. You can't define it." So.
Well,
But yeah.
you can. Here's the definition: no beginning.
Right. No, I agree.
What's so? There's nothing odd about that. We can define it. It has been defined, and it's not ambiguous. When you
I
say
agree.
no
I agree.
beginning, yeah, I'm sure your friend knows exactly what you mean when you say no beginning. But I think it's fair to go back and maybe spell out for him this problem of the infinite regress. Every single time, if you demand that everything that exists had to have a creator, then there's no way to begin that sequence of creating, because you fall back into this infinite regress. If you have some being that is self-existent, he had no creator, instead always was, well, then that being can create things. Nothing illogical about that. No problem there.
Right.
In fact, that becomes actually an argument for God's existence, because things do exist, and they are dependent on other prior things for their existence. They're all contingent. There must be some non-contingent thing that is responsible for all the contingent things. That is a form of a cosmological argument advanced by a philosopher named Leibniz. So you are well within your rights here to argue the way you're arguing, and he's got both feet firmly planted in midair so far with his challenges. So it'd be interesting to hear how this goes if you're able to talk with him a little bit more.
Oh yeah, I would love to. And about God not participating in time, I have thought about it. I don't really mean that. I don't think he participates in time. I think he is affected by time like we are. Like there's a reference point, like we are born and then we die.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something that affects God. So that's what I meant by that.
Yeah, well, we are temporal. We're not just temporal creatures in the sense that we participate in temporal actions and temporal becoming and temporal events, but we are not eternal creatures. We had beginnings. We will not have an ending, though, on my view, in the biblical view. So we will live forever and ever, but we will never be eternal beings. On my view, God is an eternal being, no beginning, no end, but I think he is temporal in that he is doing actions in time such that there was a creation of the world that God did, and then that event became temporally passed to God. Even to him, it was in his past. Now, he knows the events completely. He doesn't lose them in his knowledge because of his omniscience, but he is not there constantly, always creating, like fixed in that moment, always creating and always becoming a man and always raising from the dead and all of these events that we know God participates in. If he was atemporal, he'd have to be doing all of those things at the same time. And time is what keeps events distinct from each other. That they're not all happening at once. If God is atemporal, then everything happens at once to God. But it seems biblically it's not happening at once; it's happening in temporal sequence. And I don't have any reason to take the text to text anything but at face value on that one. But
that's a good point. I didn't think about that. Because if he didn't participate in time, then everything would be happening at once. That's not the case.
Yeah, and this is. There are a lot of people, good Christians, who think that God is atemporal, but I don't think they've thought about what that actually means. And here, I'd like to recommend a CD to you that is still available through Stand to Reason. It's William Lane Craig, God, Time, and Eternity. God, Time, and Eternity. And he does a fabulous job of kind of laying it out for you in a 2-hour lecture. It's crystal clear. It's heavy stuff, but it's very clear, I think, and it got me thinking, and maybe it'll get you thinking as well. It might help equip you in that area. All right?
All right, yeah. I'll definitely look into it, and I just want to thank you again for everything you've done, and you've helped me so much. It's because of your book and because of the podcast I listen to, that I can talk to my coworkers and other people around me about these things. So I just want to thank you again.
Well, you're welcome. You're welcome, and hope to hear from you again after you chat with your coworker a little bit more and see where you're at, okay?
Yeah, it was great talking to you, Greg.
Okay, pace, Cornell.
Pace Domnului.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
And that pace is peace. Domnului in the Lord, peace in the Lord. It's a standard Romanian greeting. It's just, I think it is the only Romanian I know, but it does come in handy once in a while. Right, that's it for this hour, my friends. I'm Greg Koukl. You've been listening to Stand to Reason.